So we have currently over 300 folks who are joining our session today. We had over 900 registrants. So this topic is clearly something of interest to our information literacy teaching community. And so you can find the slides using the link on this slide going forward and the QR code to get back to this discussion. Just a little bit of background. This webinar is one of a follow-up in a series relating to celebrating 50 years of information literacy, which is a series of webinars that Jane conceptualized and has organized. And so the first sort of opening discussion was just a general idea of talking about by a panel celebrating the 50 years of information literacy by when the term was first coined 50 years ago by Paul Sierkowski. And you can find that video if you want to sort of get to that first background piece using the link on the screen. Because we have such a large group, we just wanted to go over some participation guidelines. There'll be a couple of polls during our session today. There is a Padlet available for you to contribute resources. I think that some of you may have already done that, and you can continue to do that during our session and afterwards. And that information will be shared on the final slide or at the end of the session. And then also you can use chat. It's encouraged but not required. However, because we have such a really large group, putting your questions in the Q&A platform is really going to be helpful for that part of our discussion later on. So please feel free to use that tool in the toolbar extensively. And then as mentioned earlier, the Padlet is available. The link is here that you can get to open up that resource, and you can see the resources that have already been contributed, and then those that will continue to be contributed as we go through our discussion today. Next, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have a great panel to bring great thoughts around this idea of teaching information literacy. First, Bill Badke, Associate Librarian at Trinity Western University. Jane Hammonds, Associate Professor, Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian at the Ohio State University. Also, Matthew Johnson, Director of Research and Instruction, University of South Florida. And Heidi Julien, Professor in the Department of Information Science at the University of Buffalo. I also just want to note that I'm having a few Zoom control challenges today, so I may ask Jane to jump in to assist if I get control deficit during our time today. So I apologize ahead of time. So Jane is going to go ahead and launch this poll for us, for you to share your response to the following question. Which approach or approaches does your library use for teaching information literacy? We'll let everyone have about 30 seconds to consider the question and reply, and then the results of the poll will be shared with everyone. So we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Give it one more second. Folks are still responding really quickly. All right. All right. Now we'll go ahead and end it. Sorry, we had a lot of folks that were responding. Right?
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll go ahead and end that now.
So you can see the answers here that are reflected in this audience. And course integrated session, those one-shots tend to be very, very popular. And then the online video module tutorials is second place, I guess I would say. So interesting. Great. Thank you. Thank you for participating in the poll. All right. So we're going to go to our panelists now, and we have a few questions. And the first question or questions, it's two-part, I guess, is what is working with our current approaches to teaching information literacy? And then secondly, what would you like to see change? And so I'll open this up to the panelists, and if somebody wants to get us started, jump right in.
I'm happy to start. I think a number of things are working. Obviously, one-shots are ubiquitous. I mean, that is absolutely the primary thing that we do is one-shots. And they can be helpful because they do introduce librarians to students and students to librarians. They do emphasize the role that we can play in things like databases and reference service, etc. They connect us with faculty, get us into classrooms, and all of those things are important. Of course, they really can't accomplish that much. I talk to a lot of librarians all over North America, and the one thing they say is, I do all these one-shots, I'm just not sure how effective they are at all. And even the research seems to be cloudy on the effectiveness of one-shots. And it seems to be the kind of thing that we do, but it's not working as well. I think some things that are more promising, credit courses are brilliant. If we have the people to teach them, if we have the room in the curriculum, they can do wonders. And I've got almost 40 years of teaching credit courses, and I have seen students absolutely transform in every class I've taught. And that's a brilliant thing. And then, of course, the new teacher model, which I think is going to be something that we need to pursue. I think what's not working is we're not getting into academia. We're not making the connection that we should be part of a student's education rather than mere training.
Great, thank you, Bill. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in if that's okay. So I think one of the things that excites me is there's a lot of interest in teaching among the profession, and folks who are really wanting to learn more about teaching, to engage with teaching. So I think that librarians have made a lot of effort in recent years to learn more about teaching, interested in incorporating active learning into their teaching. And so I think that we really have made a lot of strides as a profession in terms of thinking about ourselves as teachers, learning more about pedagogy, because not that we weren't, there's always been librarians who have been great teachers. But I think that within the profession as a whole, I have seen, a lot of interest in teaching that I think is very positive. But I'll also align with Bill, and we're going to talk more about, we have a specific question on one-shots later, so I won't talk more about it now, but, also, just add my opinion on to Bill's, that I think that we do need to make efforts to make a change so that the one-shot is not that dominant answer that we're seeing in terms of the way that we are approaching teaching information literacy.
Great, perfect. Heidi or Matthew?
Okay, I'll jump in. Of course, my positionality is a little bit different because I'm not working as a practicing librarian. I'm teaching pre-service librarians. So trying to prepare the next generation of folks to do this good work. I guess I want to just pick up on a couple of things that Bill mentioned. And that was the question of whether, what are the outcomes of all of this effort? And what my research over, 30 years now shows us is that people aren't really evaluating those outcomes. Some evaluation gets done, but not nearly enough to actually demonstrate the outcomes that would really strengthen the case for this work being well supported. And so, that's certainly an important point that I'd like to leave today, is the need to actually evaluate those outcomes, not only to improve our practice, but also to make the case for this work. And the other piece that I wanted to pick up on was the question of teaching the teachers. And I'm in a kind of a unique position, being both a trained librarian and someone who's a faculty member in a discipline which happens to be information science. But honestly, I have grave doubts about the train the teacher approach, just knowing my academic colleagues. And, having been swimming in this pond for a long time, I don't really see that as having a ton of potential, unfortunately. So I'll just leave it at that, and maybe say something again later. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have many similar thoughts to other folks here. This morning I was actually thinking about my own undergraduate education, and I was an undergraduate student at Virginia Tech, and I definitely remember that there were one-shots in classes that I had, but the main interaction that I had with the library that I remember was actually a researcher workshop training series that Rebecca Miller, who's now at Penn State, I saw a couple people from Penn State in the chat, but they did a whole series where I feel like we actually learned a lot of different research skills in a way that scaffolded really well, in a way that also I remembered, I guess, a lot of what I learned and was able to use a lot of what I learned in a way that I think is different from many of the one-shots that as a student, I don't think that I remember. I don't remember any of the one-shots that I had now, but I remember that workshop series, which I guess is my point. So I feel like there are a lot of things in some of the other approaches that we're doing maybe that aren't one-shots that I think are effective for students and are effective for student learning. I guess in thinking about thinking toward change, I guess a lot of my recent work is about librarian burnout and librarian job control. And so I think that one of the things in thinking about the models that we use for library instruction is really thinking about librarian labor and sort of the amount of work that we're asking from librarians. I think one-shots in particular lead to very precarious work schedules. The way that we schedule them frequently, I think, is actually sort of anxiety producing and sort of job control restricting in a way that I think leads to burnout. And in recent interviews that I've done with librarians, a lot of them have pointed to one-shots as causing burnout, both in terms of the scheduling aspects and in terms of this idea of feeling like a cog in a machine. So when we think about one-shots too, I think I always go back to Nicole's recent definition in the College and Research Libraries special issue on one-shots that really, I think, framed one-shots in a very specific way, where I think sometimes when we think of one-shots, we think of many different things. But if we think about that specific framing of one-shots and then how that sort of leads to also the idea that maybe we're not, I don't know, doing what we think that we're doing, and that it contributes to this disengagement among librarians. And I think maybe my last quick point is just thinking about maybe the difference between guest lectures and one-shots. I think that sometimes people use the terms interchangeably. And I always think about the closing keynote that Baharak Yousefi gave at the Critical Librarianship and Pedagogy Symposium, I think in 2022, where she talked about this idea of like librarians being the only people on the campus who have to go around and beg for the opportunity to do our jobs. Or I'm definitely paraphrasing, but essentially thinking about the fact that to me, like a guest lecture is something that you're sort of like invited to do and maybe don't have to go around like prodding people for the opportunity to give a guest lecture. I don't know if that's always true of guest lectures, but I think in thinking about that also, I do think that maybe like guest lectures in particular provide an opportunity for training of librarians around doing instruction. I think that maybe for many librarians who don't have good training in library school about doing library instruction, that having the opportunity to do some kind of guest lecture is actually a valuable training opportunity instead of, I think, maybe jumping to credit-bearing courses might be overwhelming for many students.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of great thoughts here from our panelists to think about going forward. So we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you all for those very good contributions. So our next question for our panelists, you can see on the screen here. Two options that have been mentioned as alternatives to the one-shot are credit-bearing information literacy courses and the teacher's model. I would add, this is Karen editorializing, since Matthew just mentioned the guest lecture idea. I wonder if that could also be entertained in this question too. What do you see as the potential benefits or challenges associated with these approaches, with the one-shot, credit bearing, teach the teachers? What are those benefits or challenges, particularly with the credit bearing, teach the teachers, and then maybe the guest lecture idea? So which of our panelists would like to get us started?
Karen, I saw some questions asking to expand on what the teach the teachers model looks like. So I'm wondering if Jane might spend a minute or two talking about that first.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. As some folks know, the Teach the Teachers model has really been the focus of my work for the past couple of years. And so basically the goal of this model is for librarians to act more in an educational developer or faculty developer role, and provide support to instructors to help them think about how they integrate information literacy into their courses. And I'll mention, sometimes you hear this as train the trainer. I try very specifically always to use teach the teacher instead of train the trainer, because I don't really like the connotations that come with train the trainer in terms of thinking about what we are trying to help them do. And I'm concerned that train the trainer is really that we're training the faculty members to use the library, which is really not the way that I conceive of this model. Very little of the work that I do with faculty is actually teaching them how to use library resources. That's a very minor part of the work. And so for me, the focus of this model is helping faculty to develop pedagogical strategies that they can use to incorporate information literacy into their classes. So, doing workshops for faculty, leading faculty learning communities, sort of course redesign programs. There's a lot of different formats that this can take, but it's really librarians acting in that educational developer or faculty developer kind of role, and in the hopes of that we're going to be transferring some of the responsibility of teaching information literacy to the faculty or to the instructors, and not having the librarians be the one that are always providing the instruction directly to students. So I hope that's a good overview of that. I know Bill also has done a lot of work in this. If there's also other things that you wanted to add about that summary, Bill, please go ahead and add that in there.
Yeah, we did a workshop in 2022, and we're doing a repeat mini workshop series this fall, working with faculty. And the main emphasis has been transforming the research assignment into a student training tool in information literacy, developing scaffolded assignments. And the key was something that Robert Farrell and I worked on. He's from City University, Lehman College, worked on a number of years ago, where the faculty determine what is an ideal student assignment. What are the elements that you would expect if you were looking at a brilliant student assignment, and articulating those in such a way that they can be turned into assignment portions. And then from that point on, the Teach the Teacher workshops have been really trying to help faculty to understand how to make that a teaching tool rather than a summative tool. So a formative tool, mentoring, etc., to develop student research ability through the assignment, which offers much less disruption to faculty. They don't have to mess up their programs. They just simply need to use scaffolded assignments and offer students opportunities to resubmit and to get their stuff up to a certain level. And it's been working very well. We're planning to do it in the fall. As far as credit-bearing courses, I'd like to use the analogy that you and your friends have found this fabulous beach. Nobody knows about it. You're the only ones who know about it. And you go there and you enjoy it all the time. And you never think about the millions of people out there who never will experience what you experience. And that's what a credit course is like. You have a set number of students, which is usually a small proportion of the whole population. And for those students, it's brilliant. I mean, I can really see the progress of a student through a course like that, to the point where they are doing really, really good work, having started with very little knowledge or understanding. And so online courses, great. And I've taught thousands of students in these courses, and they have flourished. And the faculty have noticed this, student assignment, student research is much, much better following these courses. But I'm just one person, and we don't reach most of the students. And that's the big problem with credit-bearing courses.
Thank you, Bill.
Could just jump in really quickly to build on what Bill was saying. Really, in terms of credit-bearing courses, one of the things I wanted to add really quickly is, in addition to thinking about the impact that these can have for students and the ability to have that transformational experience that he talked about with students, one of the things that I think why it's important for librarians to teach credit courses is the way it transforms us as instructors. There's research out there talking about how difficult a lot of librarians have in really fully embracing a teacher identity. And I think part of that is because the main way that many librarians teach is that one-shot session. And so it's hard, librarians will say, well, maybe I'm a teacher, but I'm not a real teacher. I'm not a teacher like the teachers, out there. And I think that experience of teaching credit-bearing courses is really important for librarians, for us, is how we think about and are able to present ourselves as teachers on campus. So I wanted to mention that really quickly. And I definitely, since I know a lot of folks were asking Heidi for more information on, her thoughts about the Teach the Teachers model. So I'll let Heidi, if that's okay, if you wanted to go ahead, and then we can kind of jump back to that if need be. So.
Sure. I guess my main, not concern so much, but the issue that I see with the Teach the Teachers model is the unwillingness of disciplinary faculty to engage on a broad scale. And that really stems from a couple of things, maybe three main things. One is not quite understanding the whole information literacy landscape, not understanding the concept or its value. And I think part of what we need to do to address that is to stop using the term information literacy, but that's a different soapbox. I think also faculty are just overworked like everybody else, and to ask them to take on a whole other set of expertise in an area that they're not trained in, I think is unrealistic, generally speaking. And then I think that despite the the very positive examples that have been provided of places where this has worked, I think scaling is very difficult because of campus politics. And I've written about this as well. I think that the political relationships between librarians and disciplinary faculty, and I apologize for that term if that offends anybody. I just don't know what other term to use. Happy to use whatever term people prefer. But those relationships on many campuses, not all, can be very tricky. And those relationships work best on small campuses. And we know this from the research. So that's really the basis for my my doubts, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks, Heidi. Jane or Bill or Matthew, any continued thoughts on this?
Yeah, if I can jump in again, that's okay. So I've actually thank you, Heidi, for sharing those concerns. So it's kind of interesting because I'm actually writing a book right now on teaching information literacy through faculty development, and I've been working on the chapter about like what are the concerns about this, and those are the the concerns that you mentioned are like concerns, really key ones. And so I think a few sort of responses that I have been thinking about and kind of responding to some of those concerns is I completely agree with this idea that, and I've seen this in the chat as well, faculty are overwhelmed already, they have a lot to teach. And if we go in and tell them they have to teach information literacy on top of everything else, there's going to be resistance for sure. So I think it has to be around, how we are framing what it is that we're doing. And we have to talk about information literacy as not something additional that they have to teach, but first of all, something that they're probably already teaching implicitly, even if not explicitly, but something that is going to help them to solve the pedagogical problem that they are experiencing. So if we go in and say, you have to teach information literacy, but if we go in and say, you're having these challenges with, plagiarism or source selection or all of these things, and here's what information literacy can do for you. So if we can frame it as the solution, it's going to lower their burden rather than adding to their burden. So I think, it has to be about how we can frame what we are doing. And then I also just wanted to mention the response of, the idea that faculty don't understand what information literacy is, which I also completely agree. But I think there is research out there that's talking about when you ask faculty if they teach the skills and concepts associated with information literacy, they say they do. If you ask them if they teach information literacy, they say they don't, right? Because they don't see what they're doing as teaching information literacy. So if there are ways that we can highlight that you're probably already teaching this, you're already interested in this, you want your students to be better researchers, and we're going to help you to do that. And again, the way that I conceive of this is it's never about teaching the faculty, or not very rarely about teaching them how to use the library better. When I meet with faculty, we talk about pedagogy. We talk about decoding the disciplines. We talk about the transparency and learning and teaching model. We talk about small teaching. So we don't really talk about, how to use the databases. And so I think it's just kind of a matter of how we might frame the approach. So I'll get off my soapbox there and hand it over to someone else. So
I found that the rise of AI has really helped us in the teacher-teacher models. I was on our AI task force for our institution, and so I was able to point out to them the fact that we had a student learning outcome that called for development of critical thinking and reasoning and information literacy, etc. Although I never use the term information literacy with our faculty when I'm discussing these things. I pointed out that unless we had something in our policy so that students couldn't circumvent that student outcome, that we would have a problem. And they really modeled many of the things that I was saying in my earlier workshops with regard to the ways in which to develop student abilities. Faculty are scared that they're going to be in a lot of research projects that are just simply generated by AI, and they don't want that. And so if you can show them how they can overcome that, then you as a librarian can really be beneficial, and faculty be open and willing to listen because you have something to say to them.
So Bill, there's a quick question in the chat I just want to bring to your attention. The question is, what term do you use to talk to faculty instead of information literacy?
I talk about research and research processes, research ability, development, etc. Research is something that faculty know about, and it really amounts to the same as information literacy.
Thank you.
I was just gonna, sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just
gonna add on to a little bit. We just finished teaching we did a week-long Information Literacy Institute for faculty at the University of South Florida in June. And then actually when I was at UCLA before this in 2022, we did week-long institutes for faculty and then for TAs, which I do want to get back to the TA a bit also. But thinking about like the two institutes that we did for faculty, I think one thing that we did is that we actually gave them money for participating. So I think it encouraged many of our faculty to consider participating, to take the time to do it, and to sort of, I don't know, help maybe in some way with that idea of like competing priorities for the faculty on our campuses. But I think also in talking, we talked with faculty there about information literacy, but also obviously related to research, doing research, teaching students how to do research. And I think many of the faculty and my experience are sort of excited about the opportunity to have this framework for how they think about teaching research in a way that I think that maybe faculty, I don't know, maybe some faculty don't have a strong understanding of like a pedagogical framework for how they teach students to do research. They just kind of expect that students have learned to do a lot of things and then have these continuing very similar issues over and over again, I think at the undergraduate, graduate, like master's and doctoral levels. So I think that many of them feel empowered by having some of that language and some of those frameworks to think about how they're teaching research skills to their students. And many of them have expressed that they've struggled with thinking about sort of the structure of what it is to teach research and the pedagogy of teaching people how to do research. So I think that has been somewhat of a thing. And then I think sort of getting faculty buy-in on some of it and encouraging faculty to then tell other faculty about the value of that. But obviously us paying people money to come to the Institute clearly leads into the issue of scaling that Heidi was talking about, right? We don't have enough money to pay every single faculty member on the campus to do our institute in whatever form that it's in. But the other thing that I did want to go back to, thinking about Jane's definition of sort of the idea of teach the teacher or faculty development, I feel like in a lot of her articles and her definition of faculty development, she includes TAs in that as well. And so I think two major things are really thinking about TAs and then also thinking about sort of the increased like contingent and casual labor in the neoliberal university and how sort of as we do these teach the teacher things, like does the information stay at our institution? Does it go to another institution? Does it leave the academy entirely? So thinking about that to, as one aspect of the scaling problem, I think also is essentially the idea that the scale is continually increasing. But I think with TAs also, when I was at UCLA, we designed actually a TA training seminar that was an elective for our graduate certificate in writing pedagogy. That actually, we talked about information literacy in the course, but the course was designed to incorporate how we design research and writing assignments together, thinking about research and writing at the same time. So really integrating those two things, but also really thinking about how we train TAs in particular, and thinking about the professional development that we provide to people really early on in the profession or in academia, in higher education. And I think thinking about that training component also, I just kind of wanted to piggyback on something that Jane was saying earlier, also about credit-bearing courses as an opportunity to develop teacher identity. I think thinking back to what I was saying about guest lectures also, I think having sort of built-in opportunities to sort of train in different ways of teaching for librarians is really valuable. You know, I think even like guest lectures in other librarians' credit-bearing courses can be really valuable. I also think having like pre-designed credit-bearing courses that different librarians have an opportunity to teach is really valuable as a way, you know, so that you don't have to develop the whole curriculum from scratch. Really thinking about some of, you know, I don't think that we always train graduate students well to teach, but we do have some structures that are in place, such as like giving them opportunities to guest lecture, giving them opportunities to teach a class that has like an already designed syllabus, stuff like that, that I think that we can also translate to librarians. And then the one last thing that I'll say is I don't think that well, so first, I think that sometimes people think that anything that a librarian does is information literacy, which I think is not necessarily true. But then I think also that librarians can teach credit-bearing courses that are also not about information literacy. So at UCLA, I also used to teach a class on careers in libraries and archives for undergraduate students, where we talked a lot about what our undergraduates could do in the future in terms of careers in the profession, that I think was also a really valuable experience and really fun to teach. And we didn't talk about information literacy at all in the class, I don't think. We did talk a lot about labor. There was also a strike that happened at the end of our course, which resulted in our course stopping happening. But so that too led to some great conversations about labor. But anyway, so just that I think we both do many things that are not information literacy already, but also that we can do. We can teach many other things also, I think.
Yeah. Wow. This is a great, a great question and a great discussion. There's lots here to consider. So we're going to go ahead and move along. And we have another poll for our participants to consider. So please consider this. Librarians should significantly reduce or eliminate one-shot sessions in favor of other approaches. So if you want to take a few seconds, and we'll give it a little more time since we have a very large audience. So great discussion. Thank you to all our panelists. Lots of things to consider here. And ways to think about these, you know, teaching opportunities. So very nice. Right, I think we're slowing down a bit. So whenever you're ready, Jane.
All right, so we're definitely slowing down. So we'll close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Great. So you can see the results. So we've got sort of a tie between folks being either not sure or disagreeing. So we have that range here. So a little bit of wonder or maybe pondering about eliminating or reducing those one-shot sessions. So thank you all. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts regarding that question. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move along to question number 3. So for our panelists, do you see a place for the one-shot in the future of information literacy instruction? What do librarians have to do to move beyond the one-shot model as the dominant approach? And there's already been some great discussion sort of around this idea, but opening this up for our panelists, anybody want to get us started?
Let me be really controversial for a little while.
Okay.
I don't think we can get rid of the one shot, and I think the results of that poll showed that. You dump the one shot and look for other approaches, and you are stymied because the academic environment is not conducive to letting librarians do a lot of other things. And so that's the big problem. If we're going to move beyond, I think the thing that we need to do is to somehow figure out how to get information literacy more centrally into the academic world. And I'm not talking about getting faculty on site. I'm talking about a broader way. I suggested one in my book, Teaching Research Processes, which was to take a grassroots approach. Find some faculty that you are conversant with, that are interested in what you're doing, who maybe want to help their students to do better research, and work with them to help them reshape their assignments, reshape their approaches, and see how that works by way of seeding something at the base. There you don't have to worry about faculty blowback, because you're finding people who are sympathetic to the cause, and work with that. The other, I think, is to more publicly state the fact that a student who goes out of our institutions without the ability to handle information wisely and well, to be able to establish problem statements and follow through with research and all those good things, is not an educated student. And somehow, I think we have to get a much bigger voice into academia, simply stating that the process is easily as important as the content. I think of Father Guido, the comedian, who developed a 5-minute university, in which he would teach everything that an average student would remember 5 years after their graduation. Took 5 minutes to teach those students everything they needed to know. Economics, buy things, sell them for more, etc. And his point was, we're feeding all this content, which disappears, becomes obsolete, is forgotten, and we're not teaching the processes that are required to be able to work with the knowledge base. And I think we can argue that this chaotic information world, which I've called the information fog, is demanding that we train or develop, not just train, but develop students as keen understanding, having a keen understanding of the information landscape and of how it works and how they fit into it and how they were able to articulate their own voices within it. And I think until we do that, until we actually have, kind of a solid front that says there has to be more, we're just not going to go anywhere. The new information literacy handbook that's being planned, and Karen's one of the senior editors of that, is looking at many of those themes in looking at information literacy as a discipline. And that's where we have to go. We're never going to move beyond unless we get information literacy, whatever we call it, into the academic mainstream as a process that is taught, that is learned, that is developed all the way through. So there's my soapbox.
Thanks, Bill. Who'd like to jump in next?
I can jump onto my soapbox, which is essentially just in thinking about I think that frequently in libraries, we want to do new things, but we want to do all of the new things without giving up any of the old things. And I just feel like that is impossible. And also leads us to places where librarians are very burnt out. So I really think that as we think about future directions for information literacy, new approaches for information literacy, we have to think about the amount of labor that we're asking of librarians. Nicole gave her presentation at the Big Ten, I think it was the Big Ten, about thinking about one shots and this idea of like the 2-shot and the 3-shot and so on, and just adding more and more labor to the work of one-shot library instruction. And so I think that we just have to be aware of the amount of work that things are and think about the ways that we can give up things. And I think in thinking about that, we can think back to the definition of one-shot instruction again and think about whether or not they're actually accomplishing what we want to accomplish. So if as a result of one-shot students aren't learning, then maybe we need to give that up. And I think that maybe in the end, it's less an idea of giving up all things that maybe we think of as one-shot library instruction and just giving up things within this very specific bucket of library instruction that isn't meaningful for students, that's not teaching anything, that students aren't retaining, that students aren't remembering us in any way from the instruction that's really immediately forgotten by students, and figuring out how we can pinpoint that and then stop doing that so that we can make space to do other things. And I guess one thing that I've been thinking about lately in terms of the idea of like the one-shot instruction model in particular is really whether or not it's even a model. I think that in many ways, it's just like this willy-nilly thing that we do. And to me, in order to be a model, there has to be something strategic about it, some kind of like vision or direction in some way that I think that we're often missing from one-shot instruction. And I think that when we do have the strategic components, what it actually is less that like, I keep using the word one-shot in like different ways that are, if you know in my mind what I mean, then you know, but if you don't know, then you don't know. But thinking about like those one-shots that are not memorable, I think that when we're not strategic, then it leads to that sort of lack of memory. So really, I think thinking about what we mean by library or what we mean by one shot, and then what we mean by a model for library instruction, and really deconstructing those. And then thinking about what our actual goals are in terms of teaching students. And I guess also, again, as we teach students, I think that sometimes we're like so learner-centered maybe that we forget that there is also a teacher there. And so really thinking about the labor conditions of teachers also. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. Heidi, Jane?
Sure. I've got a couple of thoughts. I really did appreciate the comments that Bill made, about what's possible and, to think big. And I appreciate that optimism. And Maddie, you said a couple of things that I'd like to connect. And one of them was giving people experience, or librarians experience in teaching by doing guest lectures and by sharing syllabi and that kind of thing. And I would say 100%, those are absolutely important things to do, but they're not nearly enough. I do not think we should be hiring people to do instructional work who don't have instructional training. Teaching is absolutely, it's an art, but it's also a science. And we know an awful lot about what works well. And I think that we do the whole profession and our clients a big disservice by hiring people to do that work who are unprepared. And I want to tie that to the one shot, because in my by my observations, one of the biggest problems with the one shot is that librarians are trying to squeeze too much content into that one shot time. And that is a pedagogical choice that needs to be nipped in the bud very quickly. You cannot teach more than one or two actual things in a one shot time length. But people try to squeeze in so much because that's all the time that they're given. So I think we need to be connecting those two things, the efficacy of the one shot and the lack of pedagogical expertise that's being brought to the table in the first instance. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. These are all such great things to just sort of mull over and consider how it looks where we are. Jane, did you want to have the last comment here?
Yeah, so I know we're running out of time. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention. So and I think this ties it well into what others have said already, in terms of thinking about when we say yes to a one shot and when we don't. And, that's one of the things that I see thinking about like the teachers model is that I do think that there's a place for the one shot sort of in that model. But the way I would envision it would be, that if the faculty member, the instructor had participated in faculty development programming, had a better understanding of information literacy, had been working with a librarian, to develop their assignment, that one-shot session was going to be more meaningful than it would be if it was just, I'm going away for a conference. Can you, show the students the databases? I think, we need to, as hard as it can be for us, sometimes we have to, be able to say no to some of those sessions where we know it's not really going to be educationally effective for our students. I think part of that, and I'm not the only one that has thought this, but we have to stop thinking about library instruction as a service that we offer. And, stop thinking of ourselves primarily as service providers. As service providers, providing good service would be saying yes to that session and meeting the needs of the faculty member. But as educators, I don't think that that's the way that we want to approach it. And I wanted to share a line that I found in an article that was really important to me by, it's called, I can't remember what it's called now. Not at Your Service by Yvonne Milani Mulemans and Allison Carr. And they say, if instruction librarians continue to treat what we do as service, then we will continue to be treated as service providers, right? So we have to change our mindset and how we think about instruction, I think. For me, I will say, and I hesitate kind of to say this because I know that I'm in a very privileged position in many ways, both in terms of being a faculty member and in terms of the institution that I'm at. But a lot of times, when I bring up the teach the teachers model, the response I get right away is we can't do that, right? Our faculty won't attend. And, if that's the initial response, then it just kind of cuts off the conversation right there. And so I think for me, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is mindset and how can we start, stop deferring always to the needs of the faculty member and think about, ourselves as educators, as having expertise in our area and knowing what is best, pedagogically. And so I really want us to embrace our expertise. And that's one of the things that I see with the teach the teachers approach is that we are embracing our expertise when we, sort of adopt this model. So, I know that we don't really have much time for questions at the end. We have maybe a couple, but so I'll end it there to see if we can get maybe one or two questions in.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all of our panelists. And we are going to go ahead and get to our question and answers. Jane's going to help here because although I can see we have several questions in queue, I somehow cannot see what they are. So she is going to help out with this particular in the next few minutes, addressing as many as we can. So Jane?
Okay, so one question that we had in here was about how do we get students to enroll in credit-bearing IL courses? We offer one at our college, but it's not, because it's not tied to any one program, we don't get the enrollment to get it to run.
I think we need to make sure that they are part of a program, and the courses that I teach are within a program. If you can get them to be compulsory in the curriculum, that's the best way. And I've got a graduate program that is required of everybody in a particular graduate school. They all have to take it. And some of them complain, but all of them, almost to a person afterwards, say, I'm sure glad I took that. The other thing is to get a good reputation for what this course can do among students. And my undergraduate course, which is not required, students are piling into it. Even though it's got a dubious name, scholarly inquiry and research methods, they want to take it because they've heard such good things about it. And but get it into a program if you can. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
When I taught my class on careers in libraries and archives, we actually just got a list of all of the administrative people in departments who did like undergraduate studies and stuff like that, and shared, I think maybe it was a flyer or just a description of the class with everybody. And the class ended up over enrolled. So I think also which in comparison to other classes that I've taught where it was actually part of a graduate certificate and we had very low enrollment, that like doing some of the work to market it to people who could then market it to undergraduate students was really helpful, especially since the class wasn't in it was in a department, but it was not in a department, if you know what I mean. Like it wasn't in like the English department, but it was listed as if it were in a department. Anyway, yeah.
And unfortunately, I know we're kind of right at the end of time. I did want to mention a comment that I saw in the comments where David shared for the panelists to please try not to be too exclusionary. Not all instruction librarians have pedagogical training, but they're learning on the fly. And what are ways to bring them up to speed without saying, go get another degree? And I want to say thank you for that comment, David. Really appreciate that comment because as I said earlier, I have to always try to recognize that I feel like that I'm in a privileged position in comparison in many ways to other librarians. And so sometimes these conversations can, I think, sound exclusionary to librarians in other situations. And I hope that that's not the case. But if any panelists wanted to, that's not what we're trying to do. I think I wanted to make sure to emphasize that. Any panelists that wanted to mention really quickly, sort of what are ways that librarians can learn more about pedagogy without having to go out and get a different degree?
I mentioned the 2 volumes that I edited that are coming out in the fall about training library instructors, which includes a lot of examples, including like developing communities of practice at your institution, joining a community of practice beyond your institution. So Melissa Wong and Laura Saunders lead or facilitate the library pedagogy chat that happens online that anybody can join. I think working with whatever kind of center for teaching that you have on campus to develop training for librarians in particular, having experienced instructors develop curricula that they would then deliver to other librarians, using peer observation as an approach to learning how to do instruction by watching other people do instruction, and then also incorporating some kind of reflective activity into the peer observation. Probably many other examples also, but I think that there are lots of ways I think that we can help each other learn how to do library instruction without having to get another degree. And in those volumes, there are also some reflections from people, including people who have degrees in education or other advanced degrees beyond education, who sort of comment on different ways that those either helped or didn't really help with learning to do library instruction in particular. So I think even then it still kind of depends on maybe the degree and your experiences, and not all degrees and all experiences are the same in any way.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Maddie. Heidi, did you have any last comments?
I would just say that I think that MLS programs need to do a better job of teaching folks how to teach before they graduate as well. And I also think that hiring managers need to make sure they're not hiring people into positions for which they're not qualified.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect way to end. In the chat, there were many thoughts around the MLS, MLIS programs, including a focus on teaching. So just quickly as we wind up, first, thank you to our great panelists and participants. What a rich discussion here today. So thank you, Jane, for organizing it all, and also for being a panelist and helping me out.
Thank you all for being here. And please, everyone, thank Karen for stepping in and being willing to take on the moderator duties today. And then thank you, Maddie, Heidi, and Bill for joining us today. I think this was a fantastic discussion, and I appreciate all of the different perspectives that were offered today.